So if you don't want to be recorded, blop out. But please blop out anyway, because it makes our memory much bigger than it needs to be, thus the files bigger than they need to be.
We are recording.
All right. So as I was saying before we started recording, instructors, please feel free to pop in. There are technical ways to do this. There are less technical ways to deal with how to put letters together. There's all sorts of different things that go into this. But what we're going to be dealing with mostly today is dealing with the puzzle of how do I put letters next to each other? How do I put them together in a way that they look good? And well, if I draw this letter exactly the way the ductus tells me to, and I stick it next to this other letter, I mean, that's not going to look so good. So in Uncial, the classic example is the letter A next to anything, or just about anything. So of course, I'm running out of ink. And the problem with A is that compared to all the other letters out there, that's the 60-degree A. It has a lot of white space. And so that white space can create a lot of problems because it makes other things look funky. If I stick it next to an L or a K, pretty much anything with an ascender on it, it really sticks out, especially if you do it at the 45-degree angle, because and that's your 45-degree angle A as opposed to the 60-degree angle A. So I'll put an AL. Like if I was going to say aluminum, that's an awful lot of white space here. And for some reason, the human eye does not like unbalanced white space, let alone a lot of white space between letters. Now I could do an AF. We still have that same problem. But it's slightly less of a problem. So why does AF look a little bit better than AL? Anybody? The short answer is we have a little bit of a lead in here, and it kind of breaks up that white space. And so that helps. But what you can do is go ahead and use a 60-degree A. It completely changes it. You can bring that lead in just a little bit over, just a little bit farther than you normally would, and check that out. That doesn't look the same, does it? It doesn't violate having too much white space. It looks more balanced now. Of course, it would help if I could draw a straight L, but I do the AF. And you notice that when I make the 60-degree, I can't make the belly of the A as wide. That's okay. The F invades that white space. I run out of ink, so I redip. And now it's not an issue anymore, is it? It looks good, although not There it is to the top of the screen. And so that's kind of the balance game that you play. I apologize if there's too much ink. They're getting a lot of shine off of the ink that's there. And that's just one of the ways you can do it. We do modifications for the letters so that they will look good next to each other. In Gothic, the classic for that is the word minimum. Minimum doesn't do a whole lot in Uncial. Aluminum is actually much more difficult to write. Trying to keep that straight for y'all. You know, 60 degrees, shorten that. Invade a little bit, bring the L down. Try not to run out of ink while you're doing it. See, that's why you don't rewrite your lines. It looks bad. There we go. That's better. The U can come over and invade, but it really doesn't need to. You just bring it down and make sure it barely misses or barely touches that. ALU. Now you'll notice that this white space and this white space, these two together, look pretty much like the same amount of space to us. And so our mind doesn't complain about it. Our eye is okay with it. But the M is a nice round next to this upright. So instead of making it a big round and bringing it all the way in, I go ahead and let it stay next to it with a little bit of what looks like almost a straight. And there's no balance problem. As long as I make the last stroke of the M more or less have that same amount of white space. But I have to bring the I over a little and then drop down next to it. No problems. There we go. The N, no big deal. Now in this case, this N is not going to be very forgiving, so I need to pull this out a little bit more. And it works. And these are just small modifications based on what's next to it. If I did aluminum and I wrote it the way that the Drogan says, more or less, and I follow the ductus without doing those modifications, it looks different, and you can decide if it looks better, worse, or not, you know, negligible difference. To me, the one on top, barring my bad letter form for L, To me, the one that's on top looks better. I don't know about everybody else. So, is there a general rule when it comes to how to do this? There's actually specific rules. And unfortunately, I've kind of forgotten all the exactness of them. I approach this much more artistically than I approach it analytically, which is one of the few things that I don't approach. I don't approach highly analytically. But the short version, more or less, is when doing letters. Am I there? Yeah, right about there. Okay. I do, let's say I'm going to write a B. Oop, and I dropped my pen. There is angle games that we're going to play here that help you kind of get the sight of it. And basically, it's you find the line that's over here, and you draw what would be about a 60-degree angle. And that's roughly where you want the bottom of your next letter to end or to be when it hits it. Let me grab my pen, my pen that I dropped, if I can find it. I don't know how I dropped it, and now I can't find it, but I can't.
It's the Ian the Green Comedy Hour and Pen Losing Seminar.
Yep, pretty much. If you haven't done it yet as a scribe, sooner or later you will. It's just always awesome when it happens right in the middle of a class. If I can't find it here real quick, I'll just grab another pen, but that'll change sizes on people. Right then, different pen it is. All right, sorry about that. By the way, if you ever want to know what happens to your pen if you don't clean it properly, or you forget to clean it, and then you do a really good job cleaning it, the answer is you get it stained. And that is why this pen is kind of green. Not that you're all seeing that color change, but that's okay. But that's why it looks black. It's actually kind of green. I didn't clean it once. So if I'm going to write the word bitter, B-I-T-T-E-R, I want my eye more or less to try and hit there. If I don't hit there, it's too close. Of course, the paper has thing on it. It really should be hitting there. See how that looks better? It's too close if I get it closer than that 60-degree angle. I get it on it, and it's going to look better. And that's a rough thing. That's not going to be exact every time. T is another hard one because it has too much white space underneath it as well. And in this form of uncial, it's just straight down. I prefer the curled uncial. I prefer the curved uncial, but those are half uncial or artificial uncial, and we're just doing basic uncial. All right, so now I have this T letter. And I come down there. Ta-da! Now notice the second T isn't as wide as the first T. I could make it as wide, and in fact, I should have made the first T a little bit less wide. But I can extend this out, and they're now roughly the same, roughly. And our eye notices those differences. So if you're going to make a T, you're going to shorten the second T, make sure you shorten the first T. And then the E can actually come inside. Oh, all right, so the T has, all letters have a square that goes around them, and I should have talked about that first. And so when you break that square, that's called getting inside. So I'm going to go inside the T there with my E. It could be a C or an O or any of the curves. And that looks like they're cozy and friendly, but it's a little too much compared to the two T's in that big white space that it creates. Even though I followed that rule. So the R, by the way, I saw some of you trying to pull the R out straight this way. No, it's up here. And do that. So let's draw and see if I follow the rules. So it touches here, it goes there. Nope, didn't follow that rule. Here and there, yeah, more or less followed the rule. And that's why it's not really a rule. It's a general idea. It's a general rule, for lack of a better term, the old thing of a rule of thumb. I don't know that there is a hard and fast rule for this. If any of the other instructors know of a hard and fast rule or a different way of describing this, please hop in, let us know. So what do you do for a space between words? If I wanted to write bitter taste or bitter almond or something along those lines, well, the general rule is basically you can put an O between the words, and that's a quick, easy way of doing it. That'll tell you that you have enough space. Now, the fun thing with uncial is that if you're, trying to do uncial in a perfectly period way, there are no spaces. All the words run together. If you get 3 letters of your word done at the end of the line, okay, just start at the rest of it at the next. There's no dash. There's no breaking it up. You just do it. You don't tell anybody. And yeah, it's a pain to read. But that's how it was done. If you're trying to write for more modernized, don't do that. So I'm going to say bitter almond. "60°, come in a little closer. This M can actually get inside that L if you want it to. And I'll write this again right underneath it so that people can see the difference. D's a little bit like the A, except it, or you would think it would be, but it's not. It's really just more like the O. Because the part that you're comparing is just right there. It's in the X height, and this part just doesn't affect it like the A does. So this time I'm going to shorten the T strokes. And we're going to lose an awful lot of that too much white space. And that's going to let me bring that out a little bit. And that completely changed how that word looked. So the O would roughly be here. And that little change over in the word bitter is now completely changing how the look of my entire line is going to be, because it moved things over. And that little thing can, if you do that, that's good. If you got to pay attention, because you got to plan for it, because the rest of your line has been moved as well. And all I did was move the T's a little bit closer to each other by shortening them, and then the E didn't invade the T as much, but everything else more or less was the same. If I go ahead and draw in the O, there it is. Now there's another way to do it instead of that O. So remember how I said a 60-degree angle from this edge to here? Well, make it a 30-degree angle. Double that space. Looks pretty good. And funny enough, it's about an O. So you have two different ways of looking at this. Some people do better with dealing with the angles of 30 degrees and 60 degrees. And other people, if you throw an O in there, they do better. I don't want to show you or tell you that there's only one way to do this. There's several ways. Find what works for you and use it. If you don't know how it's going to work for you, that's fine. You're new. You're not supposed to know right away. Try them out. See what does work. If they both work for you, great. Use both. Use whatever works. I'm not going to tell you that there's only one way. I will almost never tell you there's only one way to do things. So, any questions or concerns or anything specific at this point?
So, Ian, can I ask a question?
Please, absolutely.
Can you do me a favor? Down on your last line, on the left-hand corner, can you just draw a simple imperial H for me?
Imperial H?
Yeah, the capital H in the Roman capital.
I'm not very good at imperial, but I'll try.
Well, they're just straight uprights with a crossbar. It doesn't have to be anything fancy.
I really do not do this well, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not, I just haven't practiced it much. Is this what you're after?
Yeah.
And the cross was wrong. It should have been straight across, but I did an angle.
So just as another spacing thing, we know from Drogan's ductus that particularly his O, that his ductus is based on the underlying structure of the Roman capitals.
Yep.
In the Roman capitals, when we're doing them, we're told that the volume of space between two letters is equal to the space between the two uprights of the H minus the space assumed by the crossbar. So the white space, the two circles of white space between the two uprights above and below the crossbar. Roman capitals tells us that that is the volume of white space between any letter. And so if you were to draw, if you were to draw an O, you're same as Drogan's, beside the H, it will be marginally spaced farther away than the two uprights, so that the volume of white space between the H and the O is equivalent to the space between the two uprights. And so you move the letter slightly closer because at the top and the bottom of the first stroke of the O, there's that little triangle of white space. Believe it or not, the eye does see that. And the eye reads the volume of white space. And so that's what the eye expects to see to be in balance. Roman imperial capitals also tells us that the space between two words is equivalent to 50% more than the space between two letters.
So, and in this case, we have, roughly a nib width, roughly a nib width. So that would be roughly 2 nib widths in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we know that from the underlying structure to the Roman capitals or imperial capitals, which we know from its inception was extremely mathematical. But the crux of it is that simple, is that, and in actual fact, it can be demonstrated that any of the later period hands that have their root in uncial or Carolingian use that same spacing guideline.
And that's almost everything except Gothic.
Actually, no, early Gothic is based on Carolingian.
That's true, early Gothic.
Early Gothic is. It works for textura and textura quadrata and textura precisis. It falls out of line when you get to fraktur.
I'm sorry, falls out of line when you get to
fraktur.
Oh, fractures, yeah, okay.
Because the rules are broken, but at that point. But that's what I did. That's the spacing that I teach all of my students. And so anytime you get a ductus from me in any of the hands that I'm teaching, it will also include a ductus for the imperial capitals so that you can see the spacing rules. But that becomes much more, for new students, pen angles are really difficult. I find because they're still struggling to get a pen angle for the hand most of the time.
Yeah.
If you start talking about spacing as being based on a pen angle, they go, oh my God, more pen angles.
Visually, the 30-degree mark and the 45-degree mark make a huge difference, and you see that.
Mhm.
But trying to write with a 30-degree pen angle or a 45-degree pen angle, I didn't do that. That looks 45 and that looks more like 60.
Mhm.
It's really easy to get it wrong, and it's one of the more important things to do right.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a pain for beginners, which is why we mention it.
Those people that are using graph paper for their practice paper, I mentioned at the beginning of the class that Paper and Ink makes what's called calligrapher's graph paper. You can write on it. When you photocopy it, the graph paper disappears. But there's a trick using any size graph paper that will give you the pen angles very quickly.
I don't have any graph paper handy, else I grab it for you.
No, actually, all you need to do, Ian, is use your mechanical pencil and just beside, over by your H, there, just to the right of that, draw three upright lines, 4 upright lines from the bottom line to just below your T in bitter. You want it 4 high. Go to
So
the
like,
T. Go to the T in bitter. Down what there, okay, draw a line straight down to the last line, so that you've covered 4 lines. Oh, he's going to get a straight rule. Just eyeball this space over so that you get 4. You're going to end up with 16 squares.
right.
So if
And
you,
one, got
yeah,
one more.
okay. So if you go to the bottom left-hand corner and draw with your pencil or your pen a straight line to the corner opposite. Yes, there. Just go through. That's a 45. Now go from the same starting point, but make the intersection there. Yes. That's a 30, roughly. And if you go up 2 squares, if you go from the start, go up to the square, now over to the next line, you're going to draw to that point. That is roughly a 60-degree. So when you're using graph paper, you can quickly visualize with your pen nib your angles by simply connecting 2 dots.
I'd forgotten about that one. Yeah, it's a wonderful way to do it.
Mhm.
That's cool. That's very helpful.
And if you go all the way over to this one, you're getting to 15 degrees, by the way.
Yeah, and the one beside the 30 is close to 20.
Yeah.
And they don't need to be exact. I always tell my students, as long as you are consistent,
Yep.
the eye will not see it.
Yeah, and consistency in calligraphy, as I used to say, covers a whole lot of sins, for lack of a better way of putting it. If you consistently do it the same way, the eye will appreciate that, even if it's wrong. So it's one of the reasons why I harp on consistency, or when I see you doing something consistent, I praise consistency when I'm doing the commentaries that I do on people's calligraphy. Very consistent. Good job. Make a minor modification. Keep it consistent.
And just one last angle, since you went down to 15, if you go from the start point and you go up 3 squares, you've got a 75.
$75?
Yeah, because upright is 90. Yeah. So, but yeah, you can very quickly, if you're using graph paper, you can visualize. So I always give students graph paper to practice the letters on, and I always send them home with a couple of extra sheets, just because of the fact that the uprights are easier to draw straight up and down if you have the graph paper, all of it. So those are my tricks for today. Sorry.
They're useful. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I'm just trying to think back to letters that people were having a hard time with and how to make modifications for them for people, so that they're not so difficult for them, but also so that they stay true to the script. Earlier, I mentioned that the R was creating problems for people. And I had shown in a previous class why you can't always draw that R out nice and long like it's shown in the ductus. So let's say I use the word ransom. I had ink, come on. There it is. Now I have the correct pen angle. If I pull it all the way out, like Drogan shows, it sticks out pretty far. And in the case of the A, it's not going to care too much. Let me show you why. It just disappears. And it's okay if your letters touch a little bit, depending on the script. Unshel's okay with it. And I'm just going to go to Ran. But if I say, rink, R-I-N, that's not going to work. It's a beautiful, I think that's very graceful and pretty. But it doesn't really work, does it? I now have a tail there and a tail here. But I just shorten it a little. Let it stick out just a little bit. Get just a little bit of a point there. I can go ahead and do it. There we go. And it looks pretty good. Does anybody have any specific questions at this time? Letters that you're having problems getting next to one another?
Could you do a couple of Ks? So like rink is a good one. Or
Rink,
something else
get the
like
K in there. Absolutely happy to. So we have this
King might
N,
be
it's
able to.
coming out. It's not going to be as wide as an O, or essentially a G even at that point, because our I kind of completes that anyway for us. But what we can do is I'm going to actually start over here. If I pull straight down, I actually run into my N, don't I? But there's this white space up here that I need to fill in. So I'm going to do rink twice. I'm going to do it first, invading the N's airspace. All of a sudden, I can't remember if that's the initial K.
Yes, close enough.
No. Yes, it is the right one. All right. And now I'm not going to invade its space. If I started outside of the space, it looks like is it balanced? Is it too far away? Is the other one too close to the N? Here's some things. This is a lot of airspace, a lot of white space in between the I and the R and the I and the N. That space is much smaller on this one. This space matches these spaces, so it looks okay. This space does not match these two spaces, and so it's crowding the N next to it. In theory, if I drew a third rink and I made them all smushed together, the white space would be okay. Because your brain would be like, oh, okay, they're working, but you wouldn't like it anyway. And you wouldn't like it because there's intra-letter white space that makes it unbalanced. So now we're dealing not just in the technical terms, we're not just dealing with intra-letter or interletter, but we also have to balance the white space intra-letter to interletter. Intra, same letter, inter, between. And that's one of the things he was alluding to or dealing with the H and this space here and the space here. These spaces are best if they balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was good. Can you do it with a leading K? Just because it has the same thing with the R with the
So like Krispy Kreme?
pointy tail. Krispy Kreme King is one that probably shows up a lot.
King. Let's do King. Rex is easy. King is not. By the way, switch to Rex if you can't do King. It's okay most of the time. Depends on your kingdom. And that's leaning. And I stop there and I just give it a little bit of a point, just enough to draw your eye. If I actually pull this all the way out, I'm not going to be able to draw the eye in. So I stop short. But I go ahead and I put that little bit there so that it matches here and then it matches the other letters and your eye gets drawn the way it expects to get drawn. And because it does, your brain, the reader's brain does not have problems with it. Now, this is still sticking out a little bit further than this is, but it's very little. And so I can just go ahead and invade the K space a little and drop that I down. And I drew my G a little different than Drogan. I pull it down here as opposed to just doing that. And that works. I think the G is probably crowding the N a little too much.
Yeah.
But for the K and the I problem, I don't see one anymore because I changed how the K was drawn. Any other combinations? K and O actually work pretty well together. Not that you're going to run into that very much. However, if your current reign is doing German, you're going to get König and Königin for king and queen. And so you can actually pull that out just a little bit more. And that is a crappy O. But you get the idea. If I really wanted to, I'll pull it over here. Yeah. I can actually pull that out a really good distance as well to help balance that space. And that is a much better O. The problem you run into with pulling this out too far is it starts to look a little lopsided. Let me show you too far. Doesn't really look like a K anymore, does it?
I'm sorry, Ian. In German, König has an umlaut on the O.
Well, that is true. At least in modern German.
It could alternatively be written as OE.
Yeah, there is that too. Although at that point, if we're going to be doing the OE that you're
Those combined letters.
describing in the modern way, we have to connect them. Because that's actually its own sound. But the umlauts did not exist in period. They had things that looked like umlauts. They didn't work like umlauts. So it really depends on how period the thing that you're trying to do is. But yeah, in general, for the modern I, put them in. I'm trying to remember which letters have a hard time going. Does anybody have a problem with Y?
The other one
Stick
that
some Y's.
the other one that people seem to have a problem with, Ian, is the X, because the bottom of the second stroke starts below the line and they were drawing it on the line.
Yeah.
And so as a result, it looked like it was toppling. It threw it over.
Yep. So the first stroke of the X is usually pretty easy. It's kind of an A. This is the one of my favorite X's, and it's about the only X that does this, the uncial X's anyway, are about the only X's that do this. And it's like, how far over do I go? Do I go 2, 3? How far over do I go? And generally just maybe a nib width, maybe a little more, but not much. Come down, bring it up. Well, that's great, Ian, but what if it's right next to another letter? All right, let's say it's next to an A. Well, I drew that too far. Let's redo it. I can shorten this by changing its angle, which automatically shortens this. Come down, bring it up, and then stop inside that imaginary box there. And Javier, XA, is not an uncommon name in the SCA. So I bring it up and I don't touch. I want to make this angle match that angle if I can. But now I'm going to bring the belly out a little more than I might have. And it works.
The other word is Rex.
Yeah, Rex.
Because and it's challenging because you have the open space in the E.
Yeah. So the way I deal with that is I actually drop that E down just a little bit. And then I can do that. Or if I don't drop it down, yeah, you can still see. And that drop can look a little awkward sometimes. Just draw it, leave it without that. Don't put the cross on it yet. Nothing says you have to draw it right away. And now I fill in that white space. Those are the two ways I like to deal with it. Of those two, I much prefer this one.
I have a couple of questions, if
Please.
I can. When you're drawing the X, because the line of the second stroke is so steep, are you actually turning your pen angle?
I am not. And what I'm doing is I am rotating my wrist and I'm rotating my whole forearm. So I'm rotating the hand and the forearm and I'm pulling it up on a corner of the pen. So I'm here, I pull it down and then I rotate it. And I actually, you can lift your elbow.
Okay.
There it is. And you get that.
And then the other question I had goes back to what the other gal was saying about the umlaut, is that I was looking, I found a book at the library about 12th, I think they're 12th century poems in Middle Dutch. And I noticed that there's a lot of like characters, like a lot of the vowels have accent marks or carets above them. And not having seen the original source material, I'm not exactly sure. Like if I were to try to want to write this out in a calligraphy script, like how would I approach doing those?
My recommendation is keep your pen angle the same
Okay.
as the rest of the script, and then draw it according to what your pen angle will let you do, and see if that works. Obviously, do it on a test sheet first.
Mhm.
So here's the caret. And there's the caret at a 30. And that's how I handle that. The fun thing is when you start looking at manuscripts and original sources, you're going to see all sorts of things. Like that. It's an abbreviation.
Mhm.
And so there is a available resource on the internet that's medieval Latin abbreviations that you can get. You can test it against that. And unlike us, they put abbreviations at the beginning of the word, the middle of the word, the end of the word. If they do it at the beginning of the word, then they'll just, and it might be for a sound. Like if this is for paternoster, which it's not, they'll skip the A and the T, and then they'll write the N. But everybody knows that that's supposed to be pat. Not that this letter is, but it's an example. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
But yeah, that's how I would deal with the extra things you're seeing, accent marks, things like that, is keep your pen angle the same and then try and see if you can draw it. Anybody else have a suggestion for that? Because I'm not good at accent marks. I do agu and aggrave. All right. Any other questions? Because that's a good one. I hope that's the best answer I've got for you at this time. If I find another answer for you, I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks.
Someone requested that you write axe.
AXE?
Yes.
You just want to see if I can find a space for it, don't you? So that sounds like it'd be a difficult one to work with. But the nice thing is that you get to play with it and modify letters. A. Haha. X. E. I shouldn't have made my tail on my E on my A a little so much, but that could be one way to do it. I don't like the second one as much as I like the first one. But it's perfectly okay to test things out and see how it works for you. In fact, I want people to play around and see what works. And can I invade? Should I bring this up to a 60? I can less invade it. And then I can, if I leave this at 45, I can get a wider X, but then this kind of looks funky down here. Maybe I should swoop down a little more and bring it up. And you're still inside that format of what Unshul or this form of Unshul will let you do. Others?
Oh, as a question, do you intend on covering some like the standard flourishy bits when you're trying to decorate?
Right, not
the
your fault, but I
delivery?
absolutely didn't hear you. Can you start over?
Sorry. Do you plan on covering any of the common flourishes on letters to fancy them up?
There's not a lot of flourishes in Unshul. When I get to a script where we do common flourishes, yes. Is there anything you were specifically thinking about?
I mean, I guess, Rex is a good one again for if you're sticking King so-and-so in there, you want to make King so-and-so's name look a little fancier than the rest of the script.
Right. One of the ways to do that, change your ink color. It really stands out. It's amazing. Doesn't matter what it changes to. Well, red is usually a good choice. Then blue, or your kingdom's colors for ink. That's a fun one to do too. But one of the ways that you can make it stand out and not be, and I guess it's kind of a flourish. Yeah, I'll just write it without a line. Is you can go ahead and extend things a little bit or make them bigger.
Like, for example, with King, could you just take the tail of the lower on the K and extend that out under the I, for example?
You could. Let me go with Rex for right now. So you got a nice fat belly on the R. I can bring this up and around like that. And you notice how I'm missing it? And it looks like those two are combined. If you want to have fun in a slightly different way, you can actually pull that all the way over. Or trade places with that stroke with the X. Make sense?
Yeah, that's
So in that way, you can do the same idea with King or even Koenig at that point. But you got to be careful.
So
These are
Ian,
things that you can do. The question becomes, should you?
Ian,
Mm-hmm.
on that, the one thing that you can do to avoid crowding in things like the word king is not to put the third stroke of the K in until the rest of the word is printed, because then through pen manipulation, you can force it lower and over so that you know what space you're covering. Yeah.
Just what I did with the E when I was doing Rex.
Yeah.
Same exact idea.
But by leaving that stroke to the end, you avoid, you can force it. Yes. So it doesn't look cramped.
Yep.
The other thing as well with the R and the K, particularly if it's the last letter at the end of a line and you've got a little bit of space for justifying your right side, you can extend your the third stroke in your R or your K slightly over so that you don't end up with a blank space on your scroll.
Yep. And so what'll happen sometimes is you'll get this and you'll have more than a little space, but you really don't want to write the next word.
Mm-hmm.
You can extend this out. Oh, hate it when I forget to dip. And you can actually do this, and you'll see this in period even, where they'll just draw little dots above and below.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it with the paintbrush. You can do it with the pen. They both work. There we go. Now you can kind of see it. Sorry.
Nope.
So we've talked about intra-letter spacing. We've talked a little bit about inter-word spacing. One of the things I want to point out with uncial, now uncial is a little weird, is that when we're talking about interliner or interlinear spaces.
Ian, this is Richard. I just want to let you know you're going on almost an hour.
All right, we'll finish with this, is that we write on line 1, line 2 is blank, line 3 is blank, and then we start over with line 1. And so it's right on a line, 2 blank lines, right on a line, 2 blank lines. And the reason for that is that your descenders go almost a line and your ascenders go up almost a line, depending on which ones you're doing. And so it allows you to have that wide, wonderful space to write with. So, and with that, I think we can end the recording, but if anybody has questions or stuff, I'm happy to answer questions or deal with it, or if other instructors have ideas and points they want to make as well.
I guess I had one kind of unrelated to this topic, but I was looking through Drogan at some of the example photographs of old art. And one of the things that was interesting on one of the examples that's on the page right before the ductus is it shows the E's drawn kind of weird. They almost look like a C with a dot on the top. I just wasn't sure if that was an artifact of the photograph or if that's just a different variation. It looks kind of neat. I just wasn't sure what that was supposed to be.
I'll go look. I've got out Drogan. So we're not talking, so not the page opposite the ductus, but the page in front of it. Nope, not page opposite the ductus. Huh.
Yeah, it's that plate 79 where like the 4th character in after it.
Oh,
I can't read
so
it.
yeah, that's an artifact of the photostat or whatever they did not coming across very well. You'll also see that with like some of the S's, and what it is that thin line just isn't there.
Ah, okay.
At least that's my interpretation. But yeah, you'll also, it doesn't look, even if you draw that line in for yourself, that still doesn't look a whole lot like the E that Drogan is showing us to draw, does it?
Yeah, it's a little odd, but I do think it looks kind of cool. So I wasn't sure if it was something to try to replicate if you wanted to.
No, it's the
that.
quality of the manuscript.
Yeah.
And it could be that they're, because of the age of these, going back to 3rd, 4th, 5th century, that there's been manuscript is deteriorated.
Yeah. Or it's an artifact of the quality of the photograph and then trying to get that printed.
Mm-hmm.
But I bet if you actually could get a good look at this, it wouldn't look the same. But yeah, no, that's neat. Good catch.
It just looked cool. I wasn't sure.
I agree.
You see something later in the Gothic hands with the center line where it's a diamond, but not on the top like that.
Yeah. Although I gotta say, I like this. I like the T's in that one. The T's are nicer. I like curvy and stuff. I think it's more fun. And you'll notice like the X on the bottom one, they're just straight lines. They're not, the thing that Drogan is showing us. If you look at the top one, the X's don't even have a descender. What's correct? Well, yes, both. but find what, you're going to find, you're going to start writing this. Hopefully y'all are starting to write from memory and you're not looking at the ductus anymore. If you're not, if you are still looking at the ductus, that's okay. But start working on it so that you don't work from the ductus and try and get away from it. You want to have this as memorized as you can. And that necessarily means it's going to change into your hand of the script. And that's okay, as long as you're being true to the idea of Unchal. Does that make sense to people? I'm going to assume that's a yes. And the other thing is that I want people, and I want people to start looking at something. All of a sudden, I can't remember the name of it. I'm having word aphasia. Start writing the sentences where you're using every letter of the alphabet. The quick brown fox jumped over a lazy dog.
Pangrams.
That kind of a thing. Sphinx of black quartz, judge my vow. And you can actually, there's all sorts of websites for it. In fact, there's one website that you can find, in Klingon, in Elvish, and you name it. There's a really fun website for that. And I'll try and get that shared to the group. But yeah, what are those called?
I can't remember.
Pangram.
No, it's
Anyway, I'll find it for you, and I'll get that on the group, and you can start writing them yourself. And the idea is that you're no longer writing out the boring alphabet. You're actually using the alphabet, but you're learning how to put the letters next to each other to write the words, and then the sentences, and the words next to each other to get the sentences, and so on and so forth. If nobody else has any other questions, I want to thank you for putting up with the fact that I had to write in a completely in a space that I don't normally write on, and I didn't do a great job with. But thank you very much for working with me.
How would you write the name Alush fancy with this hand?
I have no idea why you would be asking something so specific, but I'll be happy to answer that for you at a later date and time. No, if I can catch you on Facebook later tonight, I'll be happy to show you a way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll be happy to do it.
Alusch.
I remember.
Someone asked.
Someone asked, yes.
If somebody else is asking, I'll be happy to work with them or both of you on how to do it. But yeah, that's a wonderful thing to want to do. By the way, Alush is the name of one of the baronesses for that particular group. And I've done stuff for them, so.
And
So
my
what-
secret plan is to make the Baroness's signatures kind of cutesy and fun.
That's not so secret anymore. All right, yeah, I can work with that. I can help you with that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Ian, one of the names is Pangram.
Pangram. Thank you. You'll often hear pronounced panagram for some reason. You like sticking the other A, but Pangram. And if you do a Google search, the first 3 websites don't suck. At least the last time I did the search. So, but find what works for you. Have fun with it. 12 jovial friars decided to become trapeze artists, but I forget the whole thing on that one. At one point in time, my apprentice sister and I thought, you know what? It would be fun to make a calendar out of these.
Ian, this is Richard. I'm going to stop recording now.
Oh yeah, I thought we'd already stopped.